Welcome back to another slow drift through the shadowed corners of Five Nights at Freddy's. Tonight, we're settling into the story of perhaps the most tragic figure in the entire franchise. A small boy whose tears marked the beginning of so much horror, whose final moments set in motion a chain of events that would echo through decades of haunted metal and restless spirits. This is the tale of the crying child. A young soul caught between family dysfunction, mechanical terror, and a birthday that would become his last. Whether you're here to uncover these details for the first time, letting familiar threads pull you deeper into understanding, or simply allowing the story to wash over you like a gentle tide as sleep takes hold, this will carry you through everything we know about this mysterious child. His fears, his family, his final days, and the questions that still linger in the quiet spaces of the lore. Before we begin, feel free to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of slow, immersive storytelling that unfolds like a dream. And let me know in the comments what aspect of the crying child's story resonates most with you. Is it the tragedy of his final moments? The mystery of what became of him, or perhaps the complex family dynamics that shaped his short life? Let's begin. Part 1. The Child in the Shadows. In the summer of 1983, in a house situated near Fredbear's family diner, there lived a small boy whose name remains one of the franchise's most debated mysteries. The community has proposed Evan, based on cipher work in the survival logbook, though this interpretation isn't universally accepted. What we can confirm with certainty is what this child meant to the unfolding tragedy of the Afton family and Fazbear Entertainment's dark history. The minigames show us a child small for his age, with medium brown hair that fell across his forehead, dark eyes that seemed perpetually wide with worry, and pale skin. He wore simple clothes, a black shirt with 2 grey stripes across the chest, light blue shorts, and greyish-brown shoes. But more than any physical description, this child is remembered for one defining characteristic. He cried, constantly. His small frame would tremble with sobs, tears streaming down his cheeks in an endless cascade of fear and distress. Based on evidence from sister location and contextual clues throughout the games, the crying child appears to be the youngest son of William Afton, co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment. He had an older brother, confirmed by the week before novel to be Michael Afton, a teenager who found endless amusement in tormenting his younger sibling. The child also had a sister, shown in the FNAF 4 minigames through the presence of a girl's bedroom in the house, though the exact identity and timing of events involving her remain subjects of interpretation among theorists. The child's world was small and terrifying. His house sat just down the street from Fredbear's family diner, the premier location for Fazbear Entertainment in 1983. From his bedroom window, he could see the building where the Golden animatronics performed. But unlike other children who delighted in the singing bears and rabbits, he found no joy in them. To him, they were sources of profound terror. Huge mechanical beings with crushing jaws and unnatural movements. His bedroom served as both refuge and trap. Scattered throughout the room were plushies representing the very animatronics he feared. A Freddy Fazbear plush, a Bonnie plush, a yellow Chica, and notably, a Foxy plush with its head removed. Whether the head was torn off by his brother as a cruel joke, or by the child himself in distress, we cannot say for certain, but its headless state adds to the room's atmosphere of damaged innocence. One plush appears throughout the minigames in ways that suggest something beyond a normal toy, the Fredbear plush. This golden bear with purple accessories appears in various locations, and the child seems to hear a voice speaking through it. The plush offers guidance and warnings. Tomorrow is another day. You know what will happen if he catches you. These specific, context-aware statements point toward active communication rather than a child's imagination. Sister Location provides crucial evidence about this plush. In a private room accessed by entering the code 1983, we see monitors displaying camera feeds of the FNAF 4 bedroom. Sitting on the desk is a Fredbear plush positioned near what appears to be a walkie-talkie or communication device with multiple buttons. The implication suggested by this setup is that someone, likely William Afton, given the room's connection to his facility, was monitoring the child through cameras and communicating through the plush. Whether this was meant as a form of protection, control, or something more sinister is open to interpretation, but the surveillance itself is evidenced by the camera feeds we see. The child's daily life followed a pattern of fear and avoidance. He would try to stay in his room, surrounded by his plushies. "These are my friends," he says in the minigames, a statement that suggests profound loneliness. When forced to leave his room, he would navigate the house cautiously, knowing his brother might leap out wearing that terrifying foxy mask. Outside journeys to the diner were ordeals. The Fredbear plush would appear at intervals, behind car tires, sitting on flowers, visible in storm drains, always watching with those knowing eyes. Whether these were multiple plushies positioned in advance or something else entirely, the effect was a sense of constant observation that the child seems to have accepted as normal. The child encountered other people on these walks. A girl with pigtails speaks to him about springlock suits and disappearances, her words adding layers to his fear, whether she intended to frighten him or was simply sharing what she knew. There were also bullies, older kids, friends of his, brother, who would mock and corner him. Fredbear's family diner featured springlock animatronics that could function as both autonomous performers and wearable suits. The technology was innovative but dangerous. Training tapes from FNAF 3 explained that even moisture could trigger springlock failures, causing the compressed mechanical parts to snap back with lethal force. If the child witnessed or heard about a springlock accident, it would help explain the specific nature of his terror. These weren't just scary-looking machines, but proven dangers. His fear extended into darkness. The minigames don't explicitly show what he experiences at night, but FNAF 4's gameplay sections present nightmare versions of the animatronics in a bedroom matching his house's layout. Whether these represent the child's actual nightmares, someone else's dreams, or something more literal has been extensively debated. The Fazbear Fright story, Dictophobia, describes experimental chambers where subjects are exposed to fear-inducing scenarios through hallucinogenic gas and animatronic props. While this is from the book series rather than the games directly, it provides a possible parallel for understanding fear-based experiments that might have occurred in the game timeline. Sister Location's breaker room map shows what could be interpreted as observation chambers, though their exact purpose isn't explicitly stated in-game. The child's attachment to his plushies became increasingly central as his isolation deepened. He would arrange them carefully, speak to them, treat them as confidants. When he returned from the diner shaken and frightened, these soft toys represented the only constant, non-threatening presences in his life. This reliance on inanimate objects for comfort speaks to a child whose human relationships offered no safety. Days passed in cycles of fear, tears, brief respite, then more fear. The child's world grew smaller with each passing day, and all the while, a birthday party at Fredbear's approached, a celebration at the one place he feared most. The countdown was literal in the minigames. 5 days until the party, then 4, then 3. Each day marked another step towards something the child clearly dreaded, yet the party proceeded despite his obvious distress. The Fredbear plush knew it too, speaking ominously. "We know where to find you." This was the crying child's existence in 1983. A small boy drowning in fear, living under what appears to be surveillance, counting down days to a birthday that loomed like a sentence. His tears weren't just expressions of momentary fright, but the constant state of a child with no safe space to exist without threat. Part 2. The Brother's Shadow. To understand the crying child fully, we must examine the person who loomed largest in his daily life, his older brother, Michael Afton. The week before novel has confirmed that Michael is indeed the older brother who wore the foxy mask, settling a long-standing debate in the community. Where the younger boy was small and timid, Michael was taller, stronger, and appeared determined to make his siblings' life miserable. Michael's appearance varies slightly between minigame scenes, sometimes appearing with pale skin in a grey shirt inside the house, other times with tan skin and visible dark hair at Fredbear's. These variations are generally understood as artistic representation rather than indicating different people, showing Michael at that transitional teenage stage. The foxy mask was Michael's primary weapon in his campaign of terror. This crude approximation of the pirate animatronic's face was a deliberate choice that weaponized his brother's specific phobia. When Michael wore it, he transformed from a brother into an embodiment of the child's fears. The pattern was consistent. Michael would hide and wait, behind doors, inside closets, beside the television. Then he'd jump out with the mask on, arms raised, voice distorted. The crying child's reaction was always collapse, dropping to the floor in a fetal position, sobbing uncontrollably. These weren't pranks in any typical sense, but calculated psychological attacks designed to maximize fear. On day 5 before the party, we see the younger brother locked in his bedroom, pounding on the door. From outside comes laughter. Michael had deliberately trapped him. The Fredbear plush appears with a cryptic statement. "Don't you remember what you saw?" This suggests the child may have witnessed something traumatic that contextualizes his current imprisonment, though what exactly he saw isn't shown in the minigames. The following days show escalating torment. Michael jumping out from behind the TV. Michael and his friends surrounding the child at Fredbear's, wearing masks of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. These friends completed the set of the main animatronics, creating a chorus of threats. They would corner the child speaking in mockery. "Aren't you excited for your party? Don't be such a baby." What drove Michael to this behavior becomes clearer when we consider the family context revealed in later games. Sister Location shows us more of the Afton family dynamics. William Afton was obsessed with his animatronics and experiments, to the point where his children became afterthoughts. The mother's absence from the narrative suggests she wasn't present to provide stability. This environment offered Michael no positive role models for appropriate behavior. Some interpretations suggest Michael's cruelty stemmed from a misguided attempt to toughen up his brother. But this reading may be overly generous. The deliberate nature of the torment, hiding with the mask, coordinating group attacks, suggests something beyond thoughtless teasing. In the dysfunctional Afton household, weakness appears to have been something to exploit, rather than protect. Michael's friends never remove their masks in the minigames. We never see their actual faces or learn their names. They exist as extensions of Michael's cruelty, making them feel less like individuals and more like a collective manifestation of the child's overwhelming situation. As the party approached, Michael's behavior escalated from home jump scares to public confrontations at the diner. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe. The child existed in constant siege, with his own brother leading the assault. What we learn from later games suggests Michael would carry this guilt throughout his life. The survival logbook, which appears to be filled out by Michael as an adult, contains drawings of Nightmare Fredbear, hinting that Michael experienced terrible dreams, possibly guilt-induced, possibly the result of exposure to his father's experiments. Sister Location's final cutscene shows Michael speaking to his father. "I did it. I found it. They thought I was you." These cryptic words suggest Michael eventually sought to undo or prevent further harm from his father's actions. If there are messages in the survival logbook from two spirits communicating with Michael, one believed to be Cassidy and another potentially the crying child, it would indicate a complicated afterlife relationship where even death couldn't fully sever the connection between brothers. But during those 5 days in 1983, Michael was simply a teenage bully, inflicting cruelty because he could, because no one stopped him, because that's what he'd learned in the environment where he grew up. The brother's shadow fell long and dark over the crying child's life, dictating every fear, shaping every action, growing larger as the party approached. Michael's role in what came next, the actual birthday party and its tragic conclusion, would define both brothers' fates in ways that rippled through the entire FNAF timeline. The scars left by this relationship, both literal and metaphorical, became foundational to understanding how William Afton's family crumbled and how the cycle of tragedy perpetuated itself. The relationship between the brothers represents something crucial in FNAF lore. How trauma compounds, how abuse cycles through families, how a moment of cruelty can shatter everything. Michael wasn't an evil person by nature, but he was a product of his environment, and his actions toward his brother became the catalyst for consequences neither could have imagined. Part 3. The surveillance state. One of the most unsettling aspects of the crying child's life was the pervasive sense of being watched. This wasn't paranoia or imagination. Evidence from Sister Location confirms that the child lived under active surveillance, with his father, William Afton, monitoring his movements and potentially influencing his experiences. The Fredbear plush serves as the primary evidence of this surveillance system. Throughout the FNAF 4 minigames, this golden bear with purple accessories appears in locations that suggest deliberate placement rather than random occurrence. It's behind a car tire in the parking lot, sitting prominently on flowers near the diner, visible in a storm drain during the child's walks, inside the diner itself, positioned where it can see the child's movements. What makes these appearances significant is the plush's ability to communicate. The voice speaking through it offers specific, contextually relevant guidance that couldn't come from a child's imagination. Tomorrow is another day when the child is distressed. You know what will happen if he catches you when his brother is hunting him. We are still your friends. Do you still believe that? When the child's fear is overwhelming. These aren't generic platitudes, but responses to immediate situations, implying someone is watching in real time and communicating through the plush. The fact that the child seems to accept this as normal, never questioning why his toy talks or how it knows what's happening, suggests this surveillance has been ongoing long enough to become his baseline reality. Sister location provides the smoking gun. In a private office accessible by entering the code 1983 on a keypad, we find monitors displaying camera feeds. These aren't feeds from Circus Baby's entertainment and rental. They're feeds from the FNAF 4 house. Specifically, we can see the crying child's bedroom from multiple angles, showing his bed, his toys, his entire private space laid bare for observation. On the desk in this private office sits a Fredbear plush, identical to the one following the child in the minigames. Next to it is what appears to be a walkie-talkie, or communication device with multiple buttons and controls. The implication is clear. Someone in this office, almost certainly William Afton, given the office's location in his underground facility, was using this equipment to monitor the child and speak through the plush. Why would William do this? Several theories exist, each with supporting evidence. The protection theory suggests William was attempting to keep his son safe after some previous incident. If the child had witnessed something traumatic, perhaps related to Elizabeth's death in Circus Baby, or one of William's other experiments, the surveillance might have been meant as a safety measure. The Fredbear plush's warnings could be genuine attempts to guide the child away from danger. The control theory posits that William was conducting psychological experiments on his own son. We know from the Funtime animatronics and the fear chambers that William had no ethical boundaries when it came to studying fear and remnant, monitoring his son's terror responses, measuring how fear manifested in a child he knew intimately, could have been research for his larger projects. The guilt theory suggests William was trying to connect with a son he'd emotionally abandoned. Unable or unwilling to engage directly, he communicated through the plush as a proxy, offering comfort from a distance. This reading casts William as tragically inadequate rather than malicious, a father who wanted to help but didn't know how to be present. The narrative construction theory is metatextual, suggesting the surveillance and the voice represent Scott Cawthon's storytelling mechanism rather than literal in-world surveillance. However, given that sister location explicitly shows the camera setup, this interpretation seems less supported by canon evidence. Regardless of William's motivation, the effect on the child was profound. He lived in a panopticon, always potentially observed, with a voice that claimed friendship but offered no real comfort or protection from the threats he faced. The Fredbear plush never stopped Michael's attacks. It never prevented the bullies from cornering him. It never made the diner less frightening. It simply narrated his suffering with cryptic observations. The surveillance extended beyond cameras. The Fredbear plushes appearing in various outdoor locations suggests William had planted multiple copies along routes his son frequented, or someone was physically moving them to maintain the illusion of the plush following the child. Either option represents a significant investment of effort into this monitoring system. Consider what this meant for the child psychologically. Every moment of vulnerability, crying in his room, confiding in his toys, experiencing genuine terror, was potentially witnessed by his father through cold electronic eyes. Privacy didn't exist. Safety didn't exist. Even his bedroom, traditionally a child's sanctuary, was compromised. The numbered days countdown in the minigames takes on additional weight when viewed through this surveillance lens. 5 days until the party. William knew the party was coming. He was watching his son count down with increasing dread. He could see the tears, the fear, the desperate resistance to attending. Yet the party happened anyway. This raises the question, If William was monitoring his son so closely, why didn't he stop the party? Why allow a child clearly traumatized by animatronics to be forced into a celebration at the place he feared most? Several possibilities exist. Perhaps William believed facing his fear would help the child overcome it. A misguided therapeutic approach. Perhaps the party was already planned, and cancelling would raise questions from his business partner, Henry Emily. Perhaps William was so detached from normal parenting that he didn't recognize his son's terror as genuine distress versus normal childhood nervousness. Or perhaps, darkest of all, William wanted to observe what would happen, treating his son's crisis as an opportunity for data collection. The cameras also may have captured something else significant. If the child saw something that traumatized him, an event referenced obliquely in the minigames, the footage might have recorded it. Whether William reviewed this footage, what he thought about it, and how it influenced his subsequent actions remain mysteries the games don't explicitly address. The surveillance system itself speaks to William's technical capabilities and resources, setting up multiple camera angles, maintaining communication equipment, ensuring reliable connections. This wasn't a simple or cheap operation. It required planning, infrastructure, and ongoing maintenance. That William devoted these resources to monitoring his son, rather than, say, protecting him from Michael's bullying, reveals his priorities and limitations as a father. In the broader FNAF narrative, this surveillance foreshadows later monitoring systems, the security cameras throughout Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations, the audio devices in FNAF 3, the complex observation networks in Sister Location. William Afton was always watching, always recording, always studying. His son was simply his first and closest subject. For the crying child, living under constant observation without ever feeling truly seen or protected was its own kind of prison. The voice through the plush claimed, "We are your friends." But friends don't simply watch suffering unfold. They intervene. The surveillance was clinical, detached, fundamentally inhuman despite being conducted by the child's own father. This dynamic makes the child's ultimate fate even more tragic. In his final moments, was William watching? Did the cameras capture his son being lifted toward Fredbear's mouth? Was William monitoring the aftermath, the ambulance, the hospital room? And if he saw all of this, what did it mean that he couldn't or wouldn't prevent it? The surveillance state of the crying child's life reflects the broader themes of FNAF. Observation without protection, technology replacing human connection, the perversion of parental care into something cold and experimental. The child lived and died under his father's gaze, yet remained fundamentally alone. Part 4. The 5 Days. The FNAF 4 minigames present the crying child's story through a countdown. 5 days before the party, then 4, then 3, building toward an inevitable conclusion. These days offer our most detailed glimpse into the child's daily existence and the escalating nightmare that consumed his final week. Day 5 begins with the child locked in his room. We see his sprite from the outside, small hands pressed against the door, clearly pounding and pleading for release. From outside comes laughter. Michael has imprisoned him, treating his brother's distress as entertainment. The Fredbear plush appears with a loaded question. Don't you remember what you saw? This line has sparked extensive debate. What did the child see? The minigames don't show us directly, but several theories exist. Some believe he witnessed his sister Elizabeth's death inside Circus Baby, traumatized by seeing his sibling pulled into the animatronics storage tank. Others suggest he saw one of William's experiments, perhaps something involving the spring-lock suits that explained his specific fear of the mechanisms. Still, others interpret what you saw as a reference to something in the child's nightmares rather than waking reality. The fact that Michael's laughter follows this question might suggest Michael was present for whatever the child witnessed, or that Michael uses the memory of it to torment his brother. The locked room could be punishment for speaking about something he wasn't supposed to see, or simply Michael's idea of a joke taken to cruel extremes. Eventually, the door opens. We don't see how or why, and the child ventures into the house. The layout becomes familiar through repetition. His bedroom, a hallway, a bathroom, his sister's bedroom, with toys and a cradle visible, the living room with a television, the kitchen. A normal suburban house turned anxiety maze. At the television, Michael is waiting. The moment the child enters the room, his brother leaps out wearing the Foxy mask, arms raised in an aggressive pose. The child immediately collapses, his sprite hitting the floor as tears stream and sobs shake his small frame. Michael simply laughs and walks away, satisfied with the reaction. This pattern repeats with variations throughout the 5 days. Michael hiding behind furniture, inside rooms, around corners, always with the mask, always jumping out, always laughing at the tears that follow. The psychological impact of this constant threat can't be overstated. The child learned he was never safe, that any moment of calm could explode into terror. Day 4 takes the child outside, likely forced to accompany family to the diner for party planning or other obligations. The walk from house to Fredbear's becomes a gauntlet of fears. The Fredbear plush appears in various spots along the way, that recurring reminder of being watched. Other children appear, some friendly, others mocking. The girl with pigtails continues her unsettling observations about the springlock suits and people disappearing. At some point during these days, the child encounters a group of bullies, older kids who circle and taunt him. Whether these are Michael's friends or simply local teenagers who've identified an easy target isn't entirely clear, but their masks, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, completing the set with Michael's Foxy, suggest coordination with his brother. The diner itself presents layers of horror for the child. The building is large, colourful, filled with the sounds of games and music and birthday celebrations. For most children, it's magical. For the crying child, it's a chamber of terrors. The animatronics, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, the original Springlock stars, loom on their stages, massive and mechanical. Inside the diner, we see the child's paralysis most clearly. At one point, he stands before the animatronic stage, frozen. He needs to pass by to reach wherever he's going, but he can't move. His feet won't carry him past these machines. The sprite stands motionless as the Fredbear plush appears. Tomorrow is another day. Not encouragement exactly, more like resignation that this fear will continue. Day 3, day 2, the countdown continues. Each day brings similar patterns. Hiding from Michael in the house, forced trips to the diner, encounters with the plush offering cryptic statements. Do you still believe that? It asks, when the child's fear seems overwhelming. Believe what? That the plush is his friend, that things will be okay, that he'll survive whatever's coming. The child's isolation becomes more apparent with each passing day. Other children at the diner are excited, running around, playing with each other. The crying child stands alone, tears streaming, finding corners where he can avoid both animatronics and people. When he does try to engage, to overcome his fear and walk past the stage, to go where everyone else goes. His courage fails. The phobia is too deep, too consuming. We also see moments of relative peace in the house, though they're tinged with sadness. The child in his room, surrounded by his plushies, arranging them carefully. "These are my friends," he says, a statement that's both touching and heartbreaking. His only friends are inanimate objects that can't hurt him, but also can't protect him or provide real companionship. The sister's room remains present, but she doesn't appear in the minigames. This absence has fueled theories about timing. Had Elizabeth already died? Was she simply elsewhere during these scenes? The cradle visible in her room suggests she was younger than the crying child, but FNAF's timeline around the Afton children's births and deaths remains deliberately vague. As the days count down, something shifts. The Fredbear plush's tone becomes more ominous. "We know where to find you" isn't comforting. It's a threat or a promise of inevitability. The child seems to understand his fate is sealed, that the party will happen regardless of his fear, that no amount of tears will change what's coming. Day 1, the final full day before the party. The child's dread is palpable, even through pixelated sprites. Every interaction, every walk to the diner, every moment in his room feels weighted with doom. The Fredbear plush appears more frequently, its messages shorter, almost as if whoever's speaking through it knows words are insufficient now. The minigames don't show the night before the party, but we can imagine it. The child in his room, unable to sleep, surrounded by plushies that offer no real comfort. The foxy plush, with its severed head, a mocking reminder of his brother's cruelty. The camera William installed, recording every moment of suffering. Michael somewhere in the house, perhaps sleeping peacefully, perhaps planning tomorrow's fun. These 5 days matter because they establish the crying child's state of mind heading into the party. He wasn't having a moment of weakness or fear. He was thoroughly traumatized, conditioned by repeated terror, isolated from any real support system. The tears that defined him weren't manipulation or dramatics, but genuine, psychological distress from a child in crisis. The adults in his life, William monitoring through cameras, Henry, Emily likely aware his business partner's son, struggled with the animatronics, presumably teachers or neighbors who must have noticed the constant crying, did nothing to intervene. The party was planned and executed despite overwhelming evidence that this child should not be forced into Fredbear's family diner, surrounded by the objects of his phobia. Understanding these 5 days is essential to understanding what happened next. The bite of 83 wasn't a random accident or sudden tragedy. It was the culmination of systematic trauma, parental neglect, sibling abuse, and institutional failure to protect a vulnerable child. Every tear he shed during those 5 days was a warning no one heeded. Part 5. The bite of 83. The party day arrived despite every warning sign, every tear, every moment of fear that had defined the previous week. What happened on that day at Fredbear's family diner would become one of the most significant events in the entire 5 nights at Freddy's timeline. The bite of 83, an incident that claimed the life of William Afton's youngest son and set in motion consequences that would echo for decades. The minigame shows us the scene with deliberate, painful detail. The diner is full of children celebrating, running around in party hats, excited by the spectacle of the animatronics and the promise of cake and games. The crying child is there too, but his experience is entirely different. He's not celebrating. He's crying, as always, overwhelmed by the noise, the crowds, and especially the presence of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie on their stages. At some point, the child tries to hide under a table, seeking refuge in the only way available to him. The darkness beneath the table, the slight barrier of tablecloth, offers minimal psychological safety from the overwhelming environment. But even this small refuge is denied him. Michael spots his brother hiding. Instead of leaving him alone, instead of recognizing the genuine distress, Michael sees opportunity for one final joke. He rallies his friends, the same group that's been tormenting the child all week, wearing their Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy masks. Together, they corner him, pull him from under the table, and as he struggles and cries, they lift him up. The sprites show the child being hoisted by the masked teenagers, his small form suspended in their hands as they chant, "Let's give him a big kiss from Fredbear." They're not trying to hurt him. Not really. In their minds, this is a prank, a way to force the child to confront his fear, to maybe finally get him to stop being such a baby about the animatronics. It's thoughtless teenage cruelty, the kind that doesn't consider consequences. They carry him toward the stage where Fredbear performs. The golden bear's mouth is open, part of its programmed movement during the song routine. The jaw moves up and down, revealing rows of teeth and the mechanical apparatus inside. This is what the child has feared, the crushing power of these machines, the spring-lock mechanisms that could fail at any moment. The teenagers lift him higher. Whether they intended to put his whole head in the mouth or just bring him close enough to scare him isn't clear from the minigame. What's clear is what happened next. The child's head entered Fredbear's mouth, and the jaw closed. Multiple factors likely contributed to the spring-lock failure. The training tapes from FNAF 3 explain that moisture can trigger the mechanisms to snap back. The child had been crying. His face was wet with tears. The teenagers holding him might have bumped the suit, jostled the internal mechanisms. The spring locks, already under tension, compressed further with foreign weight in the mouth cavity. Whatever the specific trigger, the result was catastrophic. The spring locks failed. The mechanical parts that were compressed to allow the suit to function as both animatronic and costume suddenly snapped back to their natural positions with tremendous force. Metal and machinery that had been held tight released all at once, crushing the child's skull with no possibility of resistance. The minigame shows this with shocking directness. Red pixels fill the screen, representing blood. The child's head is caught in the mechanical vice of Fredbear's jaw. The sound effects, crunching, accompanied by the child's final cry, leave no ambiguity about what's happening. Then chaos. The teenagers drop him immediately. Michael tears off his Foxy mask, the reality of what's just happened hitting him all at once. The other kids scatter. Adults rush in. The animatronics stop their performance. The diner erupts in screaming. From a medical perspective, what happened to the crying child was severe traumatic brain injury. The temporal lobe and frontal lobe were severely damaged based on later references in FNAF. The force required to cause this level of injury was massive. Spring-lock mechanisms were designed to hold together animatronic components, meaning they had to be incredibly strong. When they snapped back, they did so with the force of compressed industrial springs. The immediate aftermath saw emergency services called. Paramedics arrived and extracted the child from the animatronic's mouth, though the process itself likely caused additional damage. He was transported to a hospital, still alive, but in critical condition. The minigame ends with the screen fading to black after the bite occurs, but we know from subsequent scenes that the child survived the initial trauma. He was placed on life support in a hospital room, surrounded by medical equipment that kept his broken body functioning. For Michael, this moment shattered his world. His final prank had catastrophically backfired. Instead of scaring his brother into bravery, he'd effectively killed him. The guilt that would haunt Michael for the rest of his life began in that moment when he saw the blood, heard the screams, and realized he'd gone too far. For William Afton, the bite of 83 represented failure on multiple levels. His son was dying because of his animatronics. His surveillance hadn't prevented the tragedy. His experiments with fear and remnant had been built on the suffering of the child he couldn't protect. Whatever William's plans had been, they now had to account for the loss of his youngest son. For Fazbear Entertainment, this was a disaster. A child had his head crushed by their star animatronic during a birthday party in front of dozens of witnesses. The legal, financial, and reputational consequences would be severe. Though we know from later games that the company survived, this incident marked a turning point in safety protocols, operational procedures, and the relationship between animatronics and human staff. The bite of 83 also established a pattern in FNAF lore. The danger of the animatronics wasn't just supernatural possession, but mechanical failure. The bite of 87, which would occur years later, echoed this incident, another catastrophic failure that injured someone's head. The parallel bites bookend an era of the franchise, both involving Fredbear-adjacent animatronics and both resulting in severe cranial trauma. For the broader narrative, this moment represents the first major tragedy directly involving the Afton family's children. Elizabeth's death in Circus Baby happened around this time frame. Though the exact ordering remains debated, the crying child's death would fundamentally alter William's trajectory, potentially accelerating his experiments with Remnant and his obsession with bringing back the dead. What the bite of 83 reveals is how quickly thoughtless cruelty can become irreversible tragedy. Michael and his friends didn't set out to kill anyone. They were just teenagers doing what they'd been doing all week, pushing the boundaries of acceptable behavior without adult intervention. But the context of their prank, the dangerous machinery, the vulnerable victim, the complete lack of supervision, created conditions where a moment of stupidity became fatal. The child who had cried every day, who had lived in fear of these exact machines, whose terror had been dismissed and mocked, was ultimately proven right to be afraid. The animatronics were dangerous. The spring locks could fail. His phobia was not irrational, but prescient. Part 6. I will put you back together. In the hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the hiss of ventilators, the crying child lingered between life and death. The FNAF 4 minigames show us this liminal space through a series of stark, powerful scenes that have become some of the most analyzed moments in the entire franchise. The visuals are simple but devastating. A black screen with white text dialogue appearing in fragments, sound effects of hospital equipment, flat lines, the mechanical rhythm of life, support, flowers sitting bedside, likely brought by family or sent by concerned parties, and throughout it all, voices speaking to the dying child. Michael's voice appears first, though the game doesn't explicitly label who's speaking. Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. I'm sorry. The apology comes too late, words that can't undo the damage. Michael's guilt is palpable, even through simple text. His voice trembles with the weight of what he's done. The knowledge that his brother is dying because of a prank that went too far. The apology continues across multiple screens, Michael explaining what happened, perhaps trying to make his brother understand it wasn't meant to be fatal, perhaps trying to make himself understand. The text fragments like broken thoughts, the way guilt actually sounds in one's head, desperate, repetitive, searching for words that might somehow matter. Then another voice appears, the Fredbear plush. That same golden bear that followed the child through his final days now speaks from beside the hospital bed. But its tone has changed. Where before it offered warnings and observations, now it offers something more enigmatic and profound. I will put you back together. This line has become one of the most debated in FNAF lore. What does it mean to be put back together? Who is really speaking through the plush? William Afton, monitoring through his surveillance system, or something else? And was this promise fulfilled, or does it remain unfulfilled? Let's explore the interpretations, clearly marking which are confirmed and which are theories. The remnant reconstruction theory, based on what we learn about William's experiments in later games, suggests the promise refers to literal physical reconstruction through remnant, the supernatural substance that can preserve life essence in metal. William had been studying possession and how souls could inhabit animatronics. His dying son presented an opportunity to test if remnant could restore life, or at least prevent complete death. This interpretation suggests William intended to extract his son's essence and place it into an animatronic, effectively making his son immortal through mechanical means. Whether this succeeded is ambiguous. Some theorists point to Golden Freddy as the crying child's eventual vessel, while others suggest the process failed or was never completed. The spiritual peace interpretation suggests "put you back together" refers not to physical reconstruction, but spiritual wholeness. The child's soul was fragmented by trauma, the fear, the bullying, the surveillance, the final betrayal by his brother. Being put back together meant finding peace, resolution, release from suffering. This reading treats the promise as spiritual rather than mechanical. The narrative reconstruction theory is metatextual. Scott Cawthon, through the Fredbear plush as a narrative device, promises players that the crying child's story will be reconstructed across multiple games. We will piece together his identity, his family, his significance through scattered clues. The promise is to us as much as to the child. The failed promise interpretation suggests the statement was sincere, but ultimately unsuccessful. William tried to save his son through remnant experiments, but failed. The crying child died despite the promise. And William's subsequent actions, his increasingly desperate experiments, his descent into becoming a serial killer, stemmed from this failure. The promise haunts William because he couldn't fulfill it. As the hospital scenes progress, the dialogue fragments further. The flowers, their presence suggesting someone cares, perhaps Henry, Emily, or other family friends, remain silent witnesses. The equipment sounds grow more urgent. The flat line tone becomes more frequent. Then the final moment. The screen goes black. A flat line sound plays, long and continuous. The crying child has died. This death is confirmed through multiple pieces of evidence. The flatline sound is unambiguous in its medical meaning. The minigame ends immediately after, suggesting narrative closure. And crucially, the TV in the hospital room shows Fredbear and Friends 1983, the copyright date confirming when this death occurred, cementing it in the timeline. What happened to the crying child's soul after death remains one of FNAF's biggest mysteries. The main theories include: the Golden Freddy possession theory is well supported. Many in the community interpret evidence suggesting the crying child spirit inhabits Golden Freddy alongside Cassidy, creating what's known as the Golden Duo theory. This interpretation draws on parallels from the Fazbear Frights books, particularly the Stitch Wraith storyline, where two souls inhabit one vessel. Evidence includes Golden Freddy's association with the crying child story, the fifth missing child whose identity connects to the bite victim, and various minigame clues. However, some point to evidence that suggests Golden Freddy is solely inhabited by Cassidy, one of William's murder victims. They suggest the crying child's soul found a different fate. The Shadow Freddy theory proposes the crying child became Shadow Freddy, a dark apparition that appears throughout the games. This entity seems connected to the Afton family and acts in ways that could be protective or guiding. The shadow form might represent incomplete possession or a soul that couldn't fully manifest. The Happiest Day release theory, supported by specific minigames, suggests the crying child received his happiest day, a birthday party where he finally received cake and celebration in death that he was denied in life. The Golden Freddy mask appearing in this minigame connects it to the bite victim, suggesting his soul found peace and moved on. The continued observation theory posits the crying child never possessed anything, but instead remained as a wandering spirit, potentially communicating through the survival logbook with Michael decades later. This would explain certain dialogue patterns and the sense of being watched that persist throughout the games. William's response to his son's death appears to have been acceleration of his darkest impulses. If William was already experimenting with Remnant before the bite, his son's death may have convinced him that death was conquerable, that souls could be preserved and transferred. This obsession led to the missing children incident in 1985, where William murdered 5 children and stuffed their bodies in animatronic suits. Henry Emily's response was different. The novel trilogy suggests Henry blamed himself for the bite, feeling responsible as co-owner of the establishment where it occurred. This guilt, combined with later tragedies involving his own daughter, Charlie, contributed to Henry's withdrawal from Fazbear Entertainment and his eventual plan to end the horror once and for all. Michael's response was lifelong guilt that shaped his entire character arc. The survival logbook shows nightmares of the incident. His actions in later games, working at various Freddy's locations, going to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, ultimately helping burn down their FNAF 6 location, can all be understood as attempts at atonement for what he did to his brother. The promise, "I will put you back together," echoes through the franchise. Whether it referred to remnant experiments, spiritual peace, narrative reconstruction, or something else entirely, the line captures the central tragedy of the crying child. Even in death, he remained an object of his father's experiments and obsessions, rather than simply being allowed to rest. Whatever became of the crying child's soul, the hospital room where he died marked the end of his suffering as a living child. The tears finally stopped. The fear ended. But in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, death is rarely true release, and the child who spent his life crying would spend his death existing in forms we're still trying to fully understand. Part 7. Names in the Shadows. Perhaps the most persistent mystery about the crying child is his actual name. Unlike other major FNAF characters whose identities are clearly established through dialogue or documentation, the Bite of 83 victim has never been officially named in the games themselves. This absence has spawned extensive community investigation and theory crafting, with one name in particular gaining significant traction. The name Evan emerges from cipher work in the Survival Logbook, a canonical book that appears to be Michael Afton's security guard logbook from his time working at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Within this logbook, two spirits seem to communicate: Cassidy, associated with Golden Freddy, and another presence that many theorists believe is the crying child reaching out to his brother. The process of deriving Evan is complex. The logbook contains several puzzles, where letters are marked or highlighted in seemingly random locations. When solved using specific methods, counting tallies, following number patterns, connecting visual clues, these letters spell out a name: E-V-A-N. The methodology goes something like this. Certain pages have tally marks. The number of tallies corresponds to page numbers or word positions. Following these coordinates through the book while collecting specific letters yields the name. Additionally, word search puzzles in the logbook have certain letters circled or marked, and when extracted in order, they contribute to spelling Evan. However, this interpretation isn't universally accepted. The puzzle solving required to reach Evan involves several assumptions about which clues to follow and which letters to prioritize. Some theorists argue the methodology is too convoluted, requiring cherry-picking certain elements while ignoring others. Alternative solutions to the same puzzles have yielded different names, or no coherent name at all. More significantly, Scott Cawthon, the creator of Five Nights at Freddy's, has never confirmed Evan as the crying child's canonical name. When asked directly in interviews or Q&As, Scott typically deflects or gives ambiguous answers that neither confirm nor deny community theories. This silence could mean the community is correct, and Scott wants players to feel accomplished for solving the puzzle, or it could mean Evan isn't actually the intended solution. Those who support the Evan theory point to several pieces of corroborating evidence beyond just the logbook. The "I'm sorry, Evan" theory notes that, in the Twisted Ones novel, William Afton says "I'm sorry" repeatedly in his memories, which could be apologizing to his deceased son. If the son's name was Evan, this would make thematic sense. However, William never specifically says "I'm sorry, Evan." The name isn't attached to the apology in the text. The Evan door observation notes that in FNAF 4, one of the hallway doors in the gameplay sections has what some see as an Ev or Eva scratched into it in the texture, potentially representing the beginning of Evan. However, this requires significant interpretation of ambiguous visual elements and could be pareidolia, seeing patterns that aren't intentionally there. The logbook's dual spirit theory, where Cassidy asks questions that another spirit, presumably the crying child, answers, makes more sense if we can identify both spirits by name. Cassidy's name is more clearly established through other evidence, so having Evan as the counterpart creates narrative symmetry. Those skeptical of Evan raise several concerns. The solution requires very specific puzzle-solving paths that aren't obviously signposted. If Scott intended players to discover the name, why make it require such convoluted decoding? Other names and identities in FNAF are eventually confirmed more directly. Alternative decodings of the same logbook clues have produced other results. Some claim to find Chris or Philip or other names using different methodologies. If multiple solutions are possible, how do we know which, if any, is correct? The name Evan doesn't appear anywhere else in FNAF media. Unlike names like William, Henry, Michael, Elizabeth, Charlie, Cassidy, all of which appear multiple times across games, books, and other materials, Evan would be isolated to this one puzzle solution. that seems inconsistent with how Scott typically develops his narrative. Before Evan gained traction, the name Chris circulated widely in the FNAF community, particularly in fan content, animations and theories. However, Chris has even less evidence than Evan. It appears to have originated from fan speculation and early YouTube theorists rather than any in-game clues. As better evidence emerged for Evan, most serious theorists abandoned Chris, though it persists in some fan works created before the shift. Other proposed names have included Norman, suggested by some early theorists based on extremely tenuous connections to background details Philip, derived from alternative logbook solutions using different puzzle-solving methods, CC or BV, not names, but acronyms, Crying Child, Bite Victim, that some fans use as placeholders. The absence of a confirmed name is narratively significant in itself. In a franchise where names carry weight, where knowing Charlotte Emily helps us understand the puppet's motivations, where recognizing William Afton's aliases lets us track his movements, the crying child remains anonymous. He's defined by his trauma, crying child, or his fate, bite victim, rather than his identity. This anonymity reinforces his role in the story. A victim whose individuality was subsumed by fear, surveillance, and ultimately tragedy. He barely had a chance to develop an identity beyond his terror before that identity was literally crushed. Perhaps not having a confirmed name reflects this loss. He was never allowed to become fully himself. For the purposes of discussion and theory, many in the community have settled on using Evan with the understanding that it's unconfirmed. It provides a convenient shorthand, a way to discuss the character without constantly using descriptions like the crying child or the bite of 83 victim. But responsible theorists note when they use Evan that it remains speculation based on logbook puzzle interpretation rather than canonical fact. The name question also ties into larger debates about the crying child's fate. If we knew his name definitively, it might clarify which spirit inhabits which animatronic. If Evan is correct and appears in the logbook alongside references to Cassidy and Golden Freddy, that would strengthen the Golden Duo theory. If the name is something else, or if no name was ever intended to be found, it might suggest the crying child's spirit went somewhere other than Golden Freddy. Scott Cawthon's approach to lore has always involved community participation in solving mysteries. He plants clues, watches to see what theories develop, and occasionally course corrects if the community goes too far off track. The fact that he's allowed Evan to persist without directly confirming or denying it for years suggests either he's satisfied with the community arriving at this conclusion, or he finds the ongoing debate itself valuable. Ultimately, whether we call him Evan, Chris, BV, CC, or simply the crying child, what matters most is understanding his role in the narrative. A young boy whose traumatic life and tragic death set in motion consequences that rippled through the entire FNAF timeline. His tears watered the seeds of horror that grew into possession, murder, and machines that walked with dead children's souls. The name matters less than the story, though having a name would make that story feel more personal, more real, more devastating. Perhaps that's why Scott has kept it ambiguous. The crying child remains partially abstract, a symbol of innocence destroyed, easier to process as archetype than as a fully named individual whose specific identity would make his suffering too concrete, too close, too human. Part 8. Theories and Interpretations. The crying child's death in 1983 marks a definitive end to his physical life. but his role in FNAF lore extends far beyond that hospital flatline. What happened to his soul, how his death influenced others, and what he ultimately represents have spawned some of the franchise's most complex and contentious theories. Let's explore the major interpretations, clearly distinguishing between what's confirmed and what remains speculation. The Mike Bro versus Mike Victim debate one fundamental question shaped early FNAF theorizing. Is Michael Afton the older brother who wore the Foxy mask? Or is he actually the crying child somehow surviving and growing up? This debate, known as Mike Bro versus Mike Victim, has largely been settled, but remains worth understanding. Mike Bro theory, now confirmed by the Week Before novel, holds that Michael is the older brother. Evidence includes the malicious behavior shown in FNAF 4, the guilt Michael expresses in later games, and Sister Location's implication that Michael is old enough to have an adult career. The Week Before explicitly establishes Michael as the mask-wearing older brother, essentially canonizing Mike Bro. Mike Victim theory proposed that the crying child somehow survived or was resurrected as Michael, making the protagonist of later games actually the victim trying to reconcile with his past. This theory attempted to explain Michael's undead state in Sister Location and certain lines in the survival logbook. However, it required significant logical gymnastics and contradicted direct evidence about the crying child's death. With the Week Before's confirmation, Mike Victim is considered debunked by most of the community. The Golden Freddy connection. The most prevalent theory about the crying child's afterlife involves Golden Freddy, the mysterious fifth animatronic that appears throughout the franchise as a ghostly, glitching presence. The Golden Duo theory proposes that Golden Freddy is inhabited by two souls: Cassidy, one of William's murder victims from the missing children incident, and the crying child. This interpretation draws heavily on the Fazbear Fright story, The Real Jake, where the Stitch Wraith is shown to be inhabited by two souls sharing one body, Jake and Andrew. The parallel structure suggests this duality might apply to Golden Freddy as well. Evidence supporting Golden Duo includes the survival logbook features two spirits communicating, one clearly identified as Cassidy through word puzzles, another, possibly Evan, whose questions and answers suggest the crying child reaching out to his brother Michael. The Happiest Day minigame from FNAF 3 shows a child receiving a birthday cake in a celebration that ends with Golden Freddy's mask appearing before fading. This scene is interpreted as the crying child finally receiving the happy party he never had while alive, with the Golden Freddy connection linking his spirit to that animatronic. Golden Freddy's unique properties, the ability to appear and disappear, the glitching behavior, the way it seems to operate by different rules than other possessed animatronics, could reflect the unusual circumstance of housing two souls with different causes of death and different relationships to William Afton. Ultimate Custom Night, where Golden Freddy Cassidy appears to be tormenting William Afton in purgatory, might involve both spirits. Some theorists suggest the child's voice, occasionally heard, could be the crying child acting as a conscience or counterbalance to Cassidy's vengeance. However, alternative interpretations exist. The Cassidy-only theory suggests Golden Freddy is possessed solely by Cassidy, one of the 5 missing children. The crying child's spirit went elsewhere or found peace without possessing any animatronic. This interpretation treats the Golden Duo evidence as misreadings or as referring to something other than shared possession. The Shadow Freddy alternative proposes the crying child became Shadow Freddy instead, a dark, less aggressive entity that appears throughout the games, Shadow Freddy's connection to the nightmare experiments and its role in helping William dismantle the animatronics in FNAF 3 could suggest a family connection. This theory is less popular, but has some support. The immediate release theory suggests the crying child's soul was put back together in the spiritual sense and moved on quickly after death. The Happiest Day minigame represents him finding peace without needing to possess anything. He appears in the survival logbook as a wandering spirit or in memories, but isn't trapped in an animatronic like the murder victims. The Nightmare Animatronics FNAF 4's gameplay features nightmare versions of the animatronics attacking in a bedroom setting. Who is experiencing these nightmares, and what do they represent? The Michael's nightmares theory suggests these are Michael's guilt-induced dreams years after his brother's death. The survival logbook shows drawings of Nightmare Fredbear, supporting the idea that Michael experiences these visions. This interpretation makes thematic sense. Michael is tormented by nightmarish versions of the characters involved in his brother's death, with Nightmare Fredbear directly representing his guilt. The crying child's nightmares theory proposes these represent what the child actually experienced, either as literal dreams or as hallucinated fears. The bedroom matches his room in the house, supporting this interpretation. However, the child dies, so unless these are his final fevered visions in the hospital, the timeline doesn't quite work. The experiment theory, drawing on parallels from the Fazbear Fright story Dittophobia, suggests someone, likely William, subjected the child to experimental fear scenarios using gas, props, and perhaps even animatronic elements. Sister Location's breaker room map shows areas that could be interpreted as experiment chambers. This would make the nightmares partially real, staged scenarios designed to study fear. The mixed timeline theory proposes the gameplay represents Michael reliving memories of his brother's fears through his own guilt-warped perspective. The mechanics and setting blend Michael's adult experience with his brother's childhood terror, creating a nightmare amalgamation. The promise fulfilled or broken. "I will put you back together" remains one of FNAF's most enigmatic lines. Was this promise kept? The fulfilled through possession interpretation suggests William successfully transferred his son's essence into something. Whether Golden Freddy, an experimental animatronic, or some form of remnant storage, the child exists in mechanical form, technically put back together, though not truly alive. This reading treats William's promise as sincerely attempted and arguably successful in a twisted way. The fulfilled through peace interpretation suggests the promise referred to spiritual wholeness. Through the Happiest Day minigame or some other mechanism, the child's fractured soul found resolution and peace. Being put back together meant healing spiritual wounds and finding rest rather than physical reconstruction. The promise broken interpretation suggests William tried and failed. Whatever experiments he conducted to save or preserve his son didn't work, or worked in ways that trapped the child's soul rather than freeing it. William's subsequent descent into murder and madness stems partly from this failure, his inability to keep his promise to his dying son. The ongoing promise theory suggests putting him back together is still in progress. Throughout the games, pieces of the crying child's story are revealed, his identity is explored, and his spirit potentially influences events. The promise is being fulfilled not by William, but by the narrative itself, gradually assembling the complete picture of who he was. The symbolic child beyond. Literal theories about possession and afterlife. The crying child functions symbolically in FNAF's broader themes. He represents innocence destroyed by negligence and cruelty. His constant crying embodies the unheeded warnings that tragedy ignored. The surveillance he lived under, but which didn't protect him, reflects the disconnect between observation and care. His death at the hands of characters he feared validates his terror, while demonstrating the cost of not taking children's fears seriously. The family dynamics surrounding him, absent mother, distant father, abusive brother, experiments and priorities that superseded his well-being, established the dysfunctional Afton family as the rotten core from which the franchise's horror grows. Every possessed animatronic, every murdered child, every supernatural incident traces back partly to the failures exhibited in how the crying child was treated. His role as victim zero, the first Afton child to die, sets the template for loss that would consume the family. Elizabeth's death in Circus Baby, Michael's undead existence, William's transformation into Springtrap. All of these echo the original tragedy of the boy whose tears no one properly addressed. Part 9. Legacy and Impact. The crying child's death didn't end with his flatline in the hospital. The consequences rippled outward, affecting people, businesses, and the very nature of the FNAF universe's supernatural rules. Understanding his legacy means tracking how one tragedy in 1983 shaped everything that came after. Impact on Michael Afton. Michael's life was fundamentally defined by what he did to his brother. The guilt didn't fade with time. It intensified, shaping his entire adult existence in ways both subtle and profound. The survival logbook provides crucial evidence of Michael's lasting trauma. Filled out decades after the incident, it contains drawings of Nightmare Fredbear, suggesting Michael still experiences visions or dreams of the nightmare animatronic, most associated with his brother's death. These aren't random doodles, but recurring images that haunt his subconscious. Michael's employment pattern across the FNAF games reveals someone seeking atonement or answers. He works at various Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations under the alias Mike Schmidt. He goes to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, following his father's instructions to find something, likely Elizabeth, his sister, creating a pattern of Michael trying to rescue or reconcile with lost family members. Sister Location's ending cutscene shows Michael addressing William directly. "I'm going to come find you." This isn't a threat, but a mission statement. Michael is hunting his father, likely to stop him, to undo some of the damage, to prevent William's experiments from harming more people. The motivation traces back to Michael's guilt. Having failed his younger brother so catastrophically, he's determined not to fail again. Michael's physical transformation, after being scooped by Ennard, becoming an undead purple corpse held together by Remnant, creates a twisted parallel to his brother. The crying child died and possibly lingered as a spirit in an animatronic. Michael died and lingered as a spirit in his own corpse. Both brothers existed in states between life and death, though through different mechanisms. The possible communication in the survival logbook between Michael and his brother's spirit, if the Evan theory is correct, would represent a kind of reconciliation, or at least connection, that was impossible while the child lived. Michael finally talking to his brother through coded messages decades after killing him carries devastating emotional weight. Impact on William Afton. The crying child's death appears to have been a catalyst for William's darkest actions, though the exact causal relationship remains debated. William was already conducting experiments before his son's death. The surveillance system, the various animatronic innovations, possibly even early remnant work. But the child's death may have intensified his obsession with conquering mortality and preserving souls beyond physical death. The missing children incident in 1985, where William murdered 5 children and stuffed their bodies in animatronic suits, occurred 2 years after the bite of '83. The timing suggests possible connection. Some theories propose William was trying to replicate what happened with Charlie, who possessed the puppet after William killed her, to deliberately create possessed animatronics. Others suggest he was experimenting to find a way to bring his son back. The "I will put you back together" promise, if spoken by William, represents a commitment that may have driven his subsequent actions. Unable to accept his son's death, William pursued increasingly extreme methods to preserve, revive, or somehow reconstruct life in mechanical form. His experiments with Remnant, his creation of the Funtime animatronics with captured soul fragments, his own eventual transformation into Springtrap, all of these could stem from trying to fulfill that hospital room promise. William's relationship with his other children also shifted after the crying child's death. His instructions to Michael decades later to go to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental suggest some awareness of his fragmented family, and perhaps a desire to reunite them, though in what form remains unclear. Impact on Henry Emily. Though Henry wasn't directly responsible for the bite of '83, it occurred at his and William's establishment, involving their animatronics during an event he approved. The guilt affected him profoundly. The novel trilogy, which parallels game lore in many respects, shows Henry as a broken man after tragedies at Freddy's. He withdrew from active management, couldn't bear to continue building the things that harmed children. His eventual suicide attempt and later execution of the final plan to burn everything in FNAF 6 stem from accumulated guilt over the role his creations played in causing suffering. Henry's relationship with William deteriorated after the bite. Whether Henry suspected William of deliberately creating dangerous situations or simply couldn't face his business partner after their venture killed a child, the partnership that founded Fazbear Entertainment crumbled. Impact on Fazbear Entertainment. The bite of '83 forced immediate operational changes. The Springlock suits, already recognized as dangerous, were retired from active use. Safe rooms where they were stored were sealed. New training protocols and safety measures were implemented, though not comprehensively enough to prevent the bite of 87 years later. The incident's public relations impact was severe, but not fatal to the brand. Fazbear Entertainment survived, reopened, expanded, though always under clouds of tragedy and whispers about the incident. The company's later attempts to downplay tragedies, to present issues as rumors, likely began with how they handled the bite of '83. Insurance, legal, and financial consequences would have been substantial. A child died at a children's restaurant from an animatronic malfunction. Lawsuits, settlements, increased insurance premiums, potential criminal investigations, all of these would have affected the company's operations. That Fazbear Entertainment continued suggests either the Afton-Emily partnership had significant resources, or they successfully settled the incident quietly. Impact on animatronic design. Post-1983, animatronic design philosophy shifted away from Springlock suits toward dedicated performance animatronics. The retrofitted models seen in FNAF 2, the withered animatronics, and the permanent performer models in FNAF 1 represent this evolution away from dual-function suits. The specific danger of the Springlocks, that moisture could trigger catastrophic failure, became a known quantity. Yet this knowledge didn't prevent all future incidents. The bite of 87 involved a different animatronic but similar cranial trauma, suggesting Fazbear Entertainment learned some lessons, but not others. Supernatural consequences. In FNAF's universe, strong emotions and traumatic deaths appear to create spiritual residue. The crying child's death, a young soul departing in fear and pain, may have contributed to the location's supernatural susceptibility. Fredbear's family diner where the bite occurred was closed after the incident, but the building, the animatronics, the spiritual imprint of what happened, these persisted. When locations reopened or when old animatronics were reused, they carried echoes of past traumas. The connection between strong negative emotions and possession-char hauntings is a consistent rule in FNAF. The crying child's prolonged fear, Michael's explosive guilt, William's promise, and subsequent failure. All of these emotions saturated the location and the animatronics involved. If the child's spirit did possess Golden Freddy or another animatronic, the bite of 83 established the mechanism for future possessions to occur. Cultural legacy within FNAF. The bite became a legend within the FNAF universe. Characters in later games reference the bite as cautionary tale. Phone Guy in FNAF 2 mentions the bite of 87, suggesting such incidents became part of the company's institutional knowledge, even if publicly downplayed. For children who attended Fredbear's or Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations, the bite would be remembered traumatically. Those who witnessed it would have been forever changed. Jeremy, the day shift guard present at the bite of 87, suffered frontal lobe damage but survived. We don't know if anyone besides Michael and his friends witnessed the 83 bite directly, but the aftermath would have been visible to the party attendees, the thematic legacy beyond specific plot impacts. The crying child's story established thematic elements that recur throughout FNAF. Children are vulnerable to adults who don't protect them. The failure of William, Henry, party supervisors, and other adults to keep the child safe from both his brother and the animatronics demonstrates how institutional and familial negligence creates tragedy. Fear is rational. The child's phobia of animatronics, dismissed by others as childish cowardice, was proven entirely justified. His tears were warning signs no one heeded. This establishes a pattern where FNAF's horrors are often presaged by someone being afraid and ignored. Family dysfunction destroys. The Afton family's various failures, William's negligence, Michael's cruelty, the absent mother, the prioritization of work and experiments over well-being, created conditions for tragedy. This dysfunctional family dynamic mirrors the dysfunctional company they built, both rotten at the core. Guilt endures. Michael spent his entire life after the incident carrying what he'd done. William's promise, "I will put you back together," suggests guilt or responsibility that drove him to extremes. Guilt doesn't fade in FNAF. It festers and transforms into obsession. Death is not the end. The crying child died, but his story continued through possession, memory, spiritual communication, and influence on living characters. In FNAF's universe, death marks transition, not conclusion. The crying child's legacy is thus both narrative, directly causing plot events, and thematic, establishing the patterns and rules of the FNAF universe. Every child who died afterward, every possessed animatronic, every failure to protect the innocent, all of these echo the original tragedy of the boy who cried and no one truly listened until it was too late. Part 10. Closure and continuing questions. As we reach the end of this deep exploration into the crying child's story, it's worth reflecting on what we know, with certainty, what remains speculation, and why this character continues to captivate the FNAF community more than a decade after FNAF 4's release. What we know for certain. Let's establish the confirmed facts, drawn directly from the games and verified supporting materials. The child existed in 1983, as confirmed by the Fredbear and Friends 1983 TV show Copyright in the Hospital Room Scene, and the Sister Location Private Room Code 1983, showing camera feeds of his bedroom. He was William Afton's youngest son and Michael Afton's younger brother, established through the house dynamics, sister location connections, and confirmed by the week before novel's identification of Michael as the mask-wearing older brother. He had an intense phobia of the animatronics, particularly Fredbear, shown through his constant crying and physical reactions when forced near them. He was under surveillance by William through cameras and communication via the Fredbear plush, evidenced by the sister location private room revealing monitors and communication equipment. He suffered bullying primarily from his brother Michael, who used a foxy mask to terrorize him, along with Michael's friends wearing masks of other animatronics. On his birthday at Fredbear's family diner, Michael and friends lifted him toward Fredbear's mouth as a prank, resulting in a catastrophic spring lock failure that crushed his skull. The bite of 83. He was hospitalized and placed on life support, where Michael apologized and a voice, through the Fredbear plush, promised, "I will put you back together." He died in the hospital, confirmed by the flatline audio that plays at the end of the final minigame. These facts form the skeleton of his story, the pieces we can point to with confidence when discussing this character. What remains uncertain. Despite extensive community investigation, several crucial aspects remain unresolved or debated. His actual name. Evan is the most popular theory from survival logbook ciphers, but Scott Cawthon has never confirmed it. The child could be Evan or another name, or perhaps intentionally nameless. The fate of his soul. Did he possess Golden Freddy, Golden Duo theory? Become Shadow Freddy, find peace immediately, happiest day, continue as a wandering spirit. Evidence exists for multiple interpretations. The meaning of "I will put you back together." Was this William promising remnant experiments? A spiritual promise of peace? A failed guarantee? A narrative meta-comment? The line's cryptic nature allows many readings. The exact relationship to Elizabeth and the timing of her death relative to his. The FNAF 4 house has a girl's bedroom, but whether Elizabeth was still alive during the bite of 83 or had already died in Circus Baby isn't definitively established. The nature of the nightmare animatronics in FNAF 4's gameplay. Are these Michael's guilt dreams, the child's actual nightmares? William's experimental scenarios. Multiple interpretations fit the available evidence. What the child saw that's referenced in the minigames. The Fredbear plush asks, "Don't you remember what you saw?" But we're never shown what this refers to. Elizabeth's death, a spring lock failure, something else. Whether his spirit communicates in the survival logbook. The dual spirit interpretation suggests he reaches out to Michael decades later, but this reading isn't universally accepted. Why these mysteries persist. Scott Cawthon's approach to FNAF lore has always involved intentional ambiguity. He plants clues that can be interpreted multiple ways, allowing the community to theorize and debate. The crying child represents this approach at its most frustrating and fascinating. The lack of a confirmed name keeps him symbolic. He's the crying child, defined by his trauma rather than his identity. This absence might be deliberate, maintaining him as an archetype of lost innocence, rather than a fully individualized character whose specificity would change how we relate to him. The uncertainty about his afterlife prevents neat narrative closure. If we knew definitively that he's at peace, or confirmed his location in the animatronic possession chain, part of the mystery would vanish. The ambiguity keeps him relevant across multiple games and theories. The cryptic promise, "I will put you back together," works precisely because it's never explained. It can apply to remnant experiments, spiritual peace, narrative reconstruction, or ongoing plot threads. Its vagueness makes it perpetually relevant. The character's enduring impact. Within the FNAF community, the crying child occupies a unique position. He's simultaneously one of the most tragic figures, a child who lived in fear and died horribly, and one of the most mysterious. His name, fate, and ultimate significance remain debated. Fan works often portray him with sympathy, exploring the trauma of his life and imagining kinder outcomes or afterlife scenarios. The community has essentially adopted him as a character worthy of better than what the canon provides, a child who deserves a name, a happy ending, resolution. His story resonates because it's fundamentally about failure to protect. Adults failed him. His brother failed him. The systems meant to keep children safe failed him. In a franchise built on horror, his story is horrifying not because of jump scares, but because of how preventable it all was. His tears were warnings. His fears were rational. His death was the direct result of negligence and cruelty that should have been stopped. Connecting to broader themes, the crying child embodies several of FNAF's core themes that extend beyond his individual story. Observation without intervention. William watched through cameras but didn't protect. This parallels how security guards watch animatronics through cameras, but often can't stop them. Surveillance creates full security. The cost of innovation. Fazbear Entertainment's technological ambitions, spring-lock suits, advanced animatronics, came with human costs. The crying child paid the price of innovation that prioritized spectacle over safety. Cycles of trauma. Michael's guilt drove him to dangerous work hunting his father. William's loss drove him to experiments and murder. The child's death created ripples of trauma that compounded rather than resolved. The inadequacy of apologies. Michael said sorry, but it couldn't undo the damage. William promised to put him back together, but whether he succeeded or even genuinely tried is ambiguous. Words without action don't heal. Final reflections. The crying child story isn't truly finished. With each new FNAF game, book, or piece of media, the community looks for additional clues, references to 1983, mentions of brothers or family, symbols of crying or fear, evidence about Golden Freddy's possession. Every new release might finally confirm his name, clarify his fate, explain the promise. This ongoing nature reflects something essential about FNAF as a whole. It's a narrative puzzle where pieces are revealed slowly across years. The crying child is a central piece, but where exactly he fits depends partly on which edges of the puzzle you've managed to assemble around him. For those who come to his story for the first time, the tragedy is immediate. A small boy afraid of robots was killed by one as his brother watched. But for those who've spent years following the theories, comparing evidence, solving logbook ciphers, and debating in forums, the crying child is a mystery that represents the franchise's entire approach to storytelling. His tears have dried. The flatline played out decades ago in our timeline, more than 40 years ago in the FNAF universe's timeline. but his presence persists in the gaps between animatronic movements, in the whispers of spirits, in Michael's guilt and William's experiments. Whether as Golden Freddy, Shadow Freddy, a peaceful spirit, or something else entirely, the boy who cried continues to influence a story that began with his death. Maybe that's the truest fulfillment of I Will Put You Back Together, not remnant or possession, but narrative immortality. Through our discussions, theories, and remembrance, we've collectively kept him present, examined every aspect of his brief life, given him significance beyond his death. The community has put together his story piece by piece, and in doing so, ensured he's never forgotten. The crying child lived in fear and died in pain, but his story isn't defined by endings. It's defined by the questions we keep asking, the theories we keep building, the sympathy we continue to extend to a pixelated child who never had a chance. In that sense, his story is still being written, not by Scott Cawthon alone, but by everyone who refuses to let this tragedy rest unexamined. Thank you for staying with me through this complete exploration of the crying child's story, from the surveillance that defined his daily life to the bite that ended it, from the promises made over his hospital bed to the theories about where his spirit now resides. This character, whether named Evan or forever known simply as the crying child, represents the heart of Five Nights at Freddy's tragedy. Innocence lost, warnings unheeded, and consequences that ripple through time. If you found value in this deep dive, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. This kind of detailed, thoughtful exploration of FNAF lore takes considerable research and time, and your support helps make it possible. Let me know in the comments which aspect of the crying child story resonates most with you, or what questions you still have about this mysterious figure. Until next time, may you find peace in the quieter corners of the lore, and may your own tears be of understanding rather than fear. Sleep well.